Dolphins fans, how are we doing today? It is Ben Morgan of the Fins Up Network. Our Miami Dolphins have settled in on their initial 53-man roster. Now, I say that because there could still be some moving parts. We'll talk about a couple of those potential moving parts here as we get into the video. But yes, our initial 53-man roster for the 2024 NFL season is set. We have a lot to get to today. We got surprise cuts. We've got bubble guys that ended up making the roster. Before we jump into all the Dolphins news from today, let's hear from you, your instant reactions to this initial 53-man roster. Go ahead, drop them in the comments. If you haven't gotten subscribed yet, would definitely love it if you did. For all those that already have, thank you as always for the continued support. I'm actually going to share my screen just like I did for the 53-man prediction video that I did, so we can go through. You can see who made it, who was cut, and we'll talk about the players kind of position by position like we did for the prediction. Like I said, as it pertains to the quarterback position, obviously there's not a lot of news there. We don't have to spend a lot of time with this one. I do want to point out, I found it very interesting that the Cleveland Browns, a team that ended up giving up all the assets for Deshaun Watson, for paying him all that guaranteed money, they ended up keeping 4 quarterbacks as of recording today's video. So that is definitely something to keep an eye on. They were obviously not quite ready to budge from any of their guys. But let's jump into the running backs, because a fan favorite, a guy that a lot of fans wanted to hang around, was obviously Chris Brooks. And as we see here, was essentially an injury settlement, or not injury settlement, but he was waived injured with being in that concussion protocol with the injury that he ended up sustaining in the preseason. Do have it on good account, however, that, you know what, if he wouldn't have got hurt, he was making this roster. He would have ended up making it over a guy like Jeff Wilson. Now, the team does have interest in trying to bring him back in some capacity, but it sounds like Chris Brooks and his representation really wants to test and see what's out there. They want a little bit more than what Miami is willing to offer at this point in time. But as you can see, that's what we're rolling with. And quite honestly, I like the guys we have. I obviously put in Alec Ingold with this grouping as well, but Mostert, Achane, Wright. I love that trio of running backs. You're looking at a situation where maybe even a guy like Jeff Wilson ends up being like a healthy game day scratch at this point in time, because we've seen it. The reporters have been on it. We've been on it. When you got Raheem Mostert, who has been the go-to guy at running back, and then you've got all the potential in the world with Devon Achane and Jaylen Wright, and the playmaking ability that they've shown so far in the offseason, how are you going to keep these guys off the field? So that's obviously where we are right now with the running backs, with Chris Brooks being the biggest cut. But one of the bigger news situations of the day does come at that wide receiver position. Now, Odell Beckham Jr. was officially placed on the PUP, and I see a lot of people on social media saying, well, this is Will Fuller version 2.0. I'm here to tell you that is not the case. Odell Beckham Jr. wants nothing more than to be playing. If he had it his way, he would not be on PUP. This is complete team decision to say, you know what? Let's make sure you are 100% healthy. Let's get you as perfect as possible for another part of the season. I didn't want to say the stretch run of the season, but stay as healthy as possible so that we can have you when it's truly going to matter. So yes, the team is taking it a very safe route. You'll also notice that River Craycraft was placed on the IR. He was one of 2 players placed on the IR with a designation to return. It was him and Cam Smith. So he will miss at least the first 4 weeks. Now, I also have it on good account that if River Craycraft doesn't get hurt, this team is trying to move Braxton Berrios. And quite honestly, if they weren't going to be able to move Braxton Berrios, then it was going to be an outright cut for a guy like Berrios. But there you have it right now. The team is rolling with 4 wide receivers, which essentially, in my opinion, is going to open the door for a couple of things. One of those things is pay attention to who ends up getting put on the practice squad at wide receiver, because you're looking at guys that can get elevated as well. So if we need extra bodies at wide receiver, you may end up elevating one of those guys that's on your practice squad. But as we've talked about time and time again, Look for a Jonnu Smith to be targeted more often from tight end. Look for them to motion out Devon Achane, have him start out wide, end up using him more as a wide receiver as well. The team has a plan here for trying to be able to basically survive with limited resources right now at wide receiver. And I know you talk about maybe a surprise cut, especially playing the numbers game, Eric Ezukanma. Well, there is a report out right now by Barry Jackson that says the team is interested in potentially bringing him back in some capacity, likely there on the practice squad. We'll see how that all plays out. But I've also been told that it's a bit of a message being sent to Eric Ezukanma, hopefully kind of like a tone setter for him, because they were not impressed with his attention to detail with route running. They were not impressed with how he's treating that injury. He was instructed to wear that walking boot in the last preseason game. Well, based on what I'm told, he was hearing a little bit of noise about that from the crowd. After halftime, guess who didn't have his walking boot on? Eric Ezukanma. They saw that as a bit of a sign of immaturity. So something to keep an eye on. His time in Miami might not be completely over. We'll see how all that plays out. But as of today, he has been released by the Miami Dolphins. Tight ends, nothing super surprising here with Thornton already being cut. Hayden Rucci was released. However, there is interest from the team to bring him back on the practice squad. So we'll see how that plays out. The other thing of note there is Tanner Conner making this team and not being released and not being delegated to a practice squad role, outright showing enough prior to his injury to say, yep, this guy is 53-man worthy. So big props to Tanner Conner. I'm excited to see what he can do. As I talked about in the prediction video, outside of Jonnu Smith, we know Smythe can catch the ball. We know Julian Hill can catch the ball, but they're not the dynamic playmakers with the ball in their hands. That's what Jonnu Smith is, and that's what Tanner Conner hopefully can be as well. So like I said, big ups to a guy like Tanner Conner making it. Now we'll see if it translates to on the field on Sunday if they end up activating a guy like him. Let's move on to the offensive line. Couple of interesting things of note right here. So Andrew Meyer is one of two undrafted free agents from this year's class to end up making the 53-man roster. Cornerback Storm Duck was the other one. We'll talk about him more as we get onto the defense. But Isaiah Wynn, going on to the injured list, basically created a spot for the offensive linemen. And as the ones that you can see cut there, as the ones that weren't already on IR or PUP, ends up being Andrew Meyer who gets the nod. Now, I'm not necessarily, I don't have the biggest hopes in the world for him. I don't necessarily see him as starter quality by all means at this point in time, but at least he showed enough for the team to give him that confidence. Also, once again, kind of like Tanner Conner, to say, yep, you're deserving of this roster. And quite honestly, it's a little bit different than tight end as well, because we need offensive line. We need so many bodies on this offensive line. As we sort of said in that prediction video as well, there's really not too much to talk about here on the offensive line. None of the cuts were really going to end up surprising me at this point in time. So it essentially went as we thought it was going to go, with the exception of Andrew Meyer end up making it because of the move of putting Isaiah Wynn on that injured list. Let's go over to the defense. The defensive line here. Nothing, I don't want to say nothing too surprising, because I thought so many of these guys were worthy of the 53-man roster. We'll see if any of them end up making their way back onto the practice squad. I know the team liked what they saw from a guy like Leonard Payne as well. We got a young guy there. Maybe they bring him back. I guess if there was a surprise from this, it's the fact that Neville Gallimore was cut, and he has a $1.8 million in dead cap money. So if you're following the money, maybe that one comes as a bit of a surprise. But this was just an overall tough group for the front office to end up getting to. But you got that. You got the five. You got Sealer, Campbell, and then there's gonna be the guys, your workhorses. But then those guys that you're sprinkling in with the Jones, with Hand, with Peely. Hopefully Peely can stay healthy. But I actually really like this unit. I like how this came into form. And I think a lot of that obviously is by bringing in Calais Campbell. But when you talked about replacing Christian Wilkins, replacing Raekwon Davis, I was like, this unit's taking a step back. Looking at those five, I think we can survive. I don't think it's as big of a step back as what I initially thought it was going to be. Let's go on to the edge rushers as I can get my note back into the place where I need it to be here. All right, so if we're looking at the edge rushers, Obviously, the biggest thing that I had differently, like I said, not a ton of surprises in this situation. We knew the guys that were essentially going to be on IR, the PUP list. It's that Quentin Bell ended up surviving. In my predictions, I said, where has he been? Kind of that second half of training camp. You didn't hear his name near as often when the joint practices were happening, when the preseason games were happening. He ends up making this roster. Now we'll see how all that plays out. But like I talked about in that prediction video, I'm a broken record. I've been saying that all day. I feel like it's how back is Jaylen Phillips right now? We know that he's very healthy, but at the same time, how much of a workload do they want to get him right away? How much do they trust Chop Robinson, Mohamed Kamara as rookies? You obviously have your staple there in Agba, who is really good at playing the run and has a decent history of rushing the passer as well. So at the end of the day, this was kind of a reverse numbers game where we may need some bodies if these rookies aren't quite ready for the regular season action, if Jaylen Phillips isn't quite ready for the workload. So Quentin Bell ends up making it. Outside of that, no huge surprises. Now, if we're looking at the linebacker unit, Curtis Bolton ends up not getting the spot. Now, I've been told that Curtis Bolton was an Anthony Weaver, new defensive coordinator. That was one of his guys. He wanted him. We'll see maybe how that plays out. But I wanted to say, reliable. I don't know how reliable he is. Duke Riley, we continue to kick the can down the road. And that's, I don't want to mean that as a slight to Duke Riley. He's come in, he's played meaningful snaps, but we know what we're getting with Duke Riley. So it seems like a little bit of stubbornness, the fact that we didn't give a guy like Curtis Bolton, who, if you pay attention to Pro Football Focus, I think he ended up being one of the top-rated defenders that we had in our preseason games. Now, I know it's Pro Football Focus, which is not the Bible, and I know it's preseason games. But maybe you invest a little bit in a guy like Curtis Bolton versus knowing what you already have in Duke Riley. But the team went with the reliable guy. Riley's obviously a special teams contributor as well. But outside of that, Channing Tindall does survive. I know kind of all offseason there was a rumor mill like just kind of swirling around him. Like, is this going to end up being it? Well, I think he showed just enough, apparently, during the second half of training camp into the preseason games. He sticks as well. We know what he can do as a kind of a blitzer, a delayed blitzer, a quarterback spiral. Would just like to see him make more of those tackles closer to the line of scrimmage. We'll move on to the defensive backs, where like we talked about, Cam Smith being placed on IR with that hamstring, meaning that he is going to miss at least the first 4 weeks. It's that damn hamstring. It's that soft tissue injury. It's always something like that ends up, you want to be safer with than not. So quite honestly, yeah, does it suck that our second rounder from last year continues to have to find his way, basically not being on the field? Yeah, it's terrible. I hate the fact that that's the case. But at the end of the day, I'd rather them play it safe with him, considering the fact that you've got a healthy Jalen Ramsey this year. You've got Kendall Fuller. We ended up seeing a bit of a surge from a guy like Ethan Bonner, Storm Duck, who we'll talk about here in a second. You kind of got these guys that you can, they've proven that they can kind of live without whatever Cam Smith was going to bring to the table right now, which quite honestly was a big question mark anyways. So he ends up going on the IR. Now, one of the big fan favorites that you're going to see in the cut list right there is Nick Needham. Yeah, he's a couple of years removed from that injury, but at the same time, did he show enough this offseason to make the team continue to invest in him? Well, they decided to go with one of the undrafted free agents in Storm Duck. Instead of Nick Needham, I did see, I think it was Barry Jackson again, that said that the team does have interest in Nick Needham joining the practice squad in the event Nick Needham has interest in joining the Dolphins practice squad. But we talked about the guy that kind of was maybe one of those surprise bubble guys that did make it, undrafted free agent Storm Duck. Now, he went through, I would say, a little bit of grabbiness issues in some training camp practices, in some preseason games, but clearly the team saw enough to warrant, from a pure on-field talent standpoint, to say, yep, this guy's worth investing in. But on top of that, I was told right before recording this, Mac Brown, his old college coach, called Mike McDaniel, Anthony Weaver, gave Storm Duck a heavy endorsement, not just because of what he did on the field, but in regards to his overall character and worth ethic. So that's obviously not the reason why he outright made it, but certainly helped his cause. So very interested to see how things end up playing with Storm Duck moving forward. And then we can go on to the safeties as well. A lot of what we probably expected to see here. Barry Jackson did put out that the Dolphins have interest in both of the guys that were cut in potentially joining the practice squad. But you'll see there, obviously, we kept 5 safeties. Patrick McMorris makes the team as a 6th-round pick, which means, you know what? All of our guys that were drafted were either now on, some of them are, you got a couple on IR, you got one on IR. All the guys made it. We haven't been able to say that in a lot of the drafts. So hopefully that's a sign moving forward that we've been drafting a little bit better. But Patrick McMorris ends up showing enough. He is also a guy that Anthony Weaver likes, wants to continue investing in. He ends up making the 53-man roster, the initial 53-man roster. I do want to bring up special teams real quick because we did have one change, not change, but a news item right there. Jake Bailey remains your punter. Jason Sanders remains your kicker. Blake Ferguson, as of today, was officially released. However, the current plan, based on how I have it anyways, is that it opened a roster spot for another player on the 53 that we just went over that the team really didn't want to lose. So now once you let some time pass, let the dust settle, let other teams pick up players, fill in their rosters. The plan, as of today, is to bring Ferguson back, and then they'll make an accompanying move from there. But just wanted to say what the team's plan is right now with Ferguson, given the fact that they did end up releasing him today. That's what we got, Miami Dolphins fans. Another longer one today, but hey, it's the team, it's the squad that we're rolling into the season with, so it kind of warrants a little extra attention. We'll be back with more roster news as it happens. We'll be in full swing getting prepared for week 1 pretty soon here. We'll be doing our outright season predictions for the Miami Dolphins as well. So if you haven't gotten subscribed yet, like I said, make sure you are doing it. But until next time, Miami Dolphins fans, Fins